This is both my friend Vivek Menezes and General Cardozo are amazing speakers, and I'm not, and I know that. So it's going to be this. This is the time when you can take your nap before the real action begins. Interestingly, Jose was very kind to mention many of our books. The book I actually want to talk about is a book from 2011 called Poor Economics. It was a attempt that Esther Duflo and I made to, at that point, about this 2009, 2010. And in fact, we wrote a substantial part of it in Goa. That's why I thought it was an appropriate book to come back to. And it was a book with where we were trying to think about, what's poverty about, where does it come from, and what do you do about it? And it's a book that I guess has sold many more than any of our other books, and has been translated into many languages. I just saw the Malayalam translation. I'm waiting for the Konkani translation of that book. So the point of that book, and I mean that not, it's not entirely facetious. I would love to have an excuse to come back here. I'm so grateful to be invited to this festival. I don't belong here, but when I come back, I've been here many times. I do feel that I've left a little piece of my heart here, so coming back is always a little sentimental, and I'm privileged to be able to have done that. So what I want to talk about today is, as I said, about that book, but not so much that book as much as what we've learned about that same question: where does poverty come from, and what do you do about it? And those are very related questions, of course. Since we wrote that book, so almost 12 years from then, or actually more than that, since we started writing it in 2010. So what did we learn since then, and what picture of that sort of poverty and and policies that have to do with it can we build out of what we've learned? What I want to do is, there are many, obviously, with any book or there's many ideas there. I thought I would organize this in terms of, I think, a number of maybe two tempting propositions about the lives of the poor. Ones you hear a lot. And as Vivek mentioned, part of what we try to do is to overturn cliches. And so let me start with a set of cliches about the lives of the poor. And I'm going to basically go through one at a time, telling you what we've learned sort of around that cliche. So the first cliche, I think, and maybe the most dangerous one, is that the poor are poor because they're unproductive, because they just are not able to be able to produce. So in some sense, of course, that's if they could produce build a Tesla and sell it, they would be rich. But that's sort of the wrong question. The question is are they intrinsically unproductive, or is it the case that they are that to be productive, even if you have all the talent in the world, you need something else. You need investments, you need opportunities, you need connections, you need friends, you need security, you need the confidence. And maybe all of those things are hard to have if you're poor. In other words, maybe the ultimate cause of poverty is poverty. Poor people are poor because they start poor, because their parents were poor, because they were plunged into poverty before they had any option and stayed there. The reason why view that in economics is sometimes called a poverty trap. Poverty is the explanation for poverty. The reason that's important is that in some sense, maybe once you recognize that it could be a trap, what's exciting is the possibility of unraveling. If poor people are poor because they are poor, then maybe if you make them a little less poor, they would no longer stay poor. Because if they're trapped, can you spring the trap? That's a question in poor economics. We had posed that question, but really with not much of a sense of what the answer would be. In many ways, I think if you ever write a book where everything in that book is true, it's probably not an interesting book. So we were setting out to say things which were potentially interesting, potentially false, and as I tell you, as we'll go, I'll tell you some of the things we said were false. But in any case, we asked the question: is it true that poor people are poor because they're poor? Is it the case that if you spring them from the trap, you actually will they will keep going and keep diverging from other people? What would happen if you spring them from a trap? So and this was in the days when we didn't really have enough evidence on this question. The way the work that we were awarded the Nobel Prize for is largely work of randomized control trials. What we do is we conduct large scale means often millions of people, but sometimes only thousands or many hundreds of people. And the idea is if you choose two groups or many groups at random from that population, and you give them different opportunities or different options, and you compare them, because you've chosen them random, those groups are the same. And because they're the same, you can compare them, and you can therefore learn what the true difference is. So that idea, which is the same idea as a drug trial, but conducted at an enormously larger scale. Drug trials have 60 people. We often have 13 million. So it's a different kind of exercise. But nonetheless, same idea. It often gives you a reliable answer to the question: what is it that the effect of a particular intervention is? The particular intervention I want to mention is an intervention that was conducted, actually, it was invented by a Bangladeshi NGO called BRAC. And the intervention is called the Ultra Poor Program, or what they call targeting the hardcore poor. The idea was that there are people, or I think BRAC actually called it the graduation program. And the idea was that you graduate from extreme poverty into normal poverty. These were people who were often women who had never worked, who had been abandoned, or husbands who were alcoholics or had died, and who had young children and had never worked, never earned a living, who were typically living by getting alms from people. Can you take those people and turn them into productive citizens? And their idea was, what we're going to do is we're going to, of course, asking them to take a loan, nobody's going to give them a loan, but we could ask them to give them a gift. A gift meaning you typically a cow, several goats, maybe a little bag of trinkets to sell, and we tell them, do your best, and there's someone around to encourage them to keep doing that. This was the intervention they had pioneered, and we studied that actually in 7 countries at the same time: in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Peru, in Ghana, in Ethiopia, in Honduras. And the point of studying them was to look, is it really the case that suppose I take these people who are the poorest of the poor and we give them something, if these people are really incapable of being productive, well, that's not going to change anything. They will, it's a asset. Maybe it's worth a couple of $100, but that's it. And over many years, that's not much money, so it's not going to do anything. What we found, and we've been tracking them now for many years, 10 years later, the people who got these assets are still 25% richer. They kept going. And they kept going not with the cow, which they eventually sold, and they started a business. And then with the business, they made money, and they sent their children. You can see still a difference. Remember, these are randomized groups, so they're identical. 10 years later, you see them, their children now, who were 10 then, are 20 now, they send them further away. They're working in Goa rather than Kolkata. The intervention was in West Bengal. The control group, the people who didn't get the intervention, the children work nearby. They're working in jobs. The children of the people who got the intervention, they have the confidence, the resources, maybe the connections to send their children further. So they're in Goa, they're in Surat, they're in Ahmedabad. So their lives were transformed by this intervention. They did not just, sell the cow and take the money and have a party and get finish and fall back into poverty. I think and we see this in Pakistan, we see this in Bangladesh, very similar evidence in Bangladesh, also tracked for many years. We see this in Peru. And it's, in a sense, I would say, the first point to be made is that there's talent everywhere. People are able to be productive. If they're not productive, it's because they don't get opportunities. The flip side of that, which or the very related question, another strong prejudice that is around is, so once I say, if you give people some help like this, they will be able to sustain themselves, they'll get richer. The next question, you immediately get this other, this murmur. Well, but if you give people things, they'll become lazy. You can't give people things. You have to make them earn it. Well, it's an empirical question. It's not about, we can, all the wisdom about human nature, I'm afraid, doesn't answer most of these questions. We can have we can quote all the experts and, read, whatever, Nietzsche and the Bhagavad Gita, but eventually I think we need to look at the data. And when we look at the data, what is remarkably clear is that, and we've now looked at randomized controlled trials, I think something like 15 of them across the world, but in each case people were given a free income or a free asset, and we look at what happens. In every case, the main point is that nothing happens to labor supply. They don't work less, they don't work more. Many cases, nothing changes. They continue to work as much as they were working. Making them any richer doesn't make them lazy. Or in some specific cases, they actually become more productive. They become more confident because they feel a little bit more value, they feel a little less depressed, and they actually undertake harder tasks. So in other words, yes, we can help people. People are capable, and yes, we can help them. So let me start. So a third, again, very related prejudice is that, this education, it's great. Yesterday the ASR results came out. ASR is actually a unique Indian invention. It's Pratham is an NGO here, invented the idea that you could actually measure results, the performance in education district by district in India without using professionals, by using volunteers, and you can do it at a scale. Yesterday they released their results. Annually they do it. There were 700,000 kids who were tested in 618 districts, that's an exercise that other countries have now imitated, but we invented it. We sort of don't take credit for the things that we really do well. We invented it. That particular survey yesterday, unfortunately, then revealed what the depressing result that, we have recovered a little bit from the pandemic. It was really bad in 2021, but overall, we're still behind 2018. And even in 2018, things weren't that great. Things were really pretty mediocre. a third of all children in class 5 can really do class 2 level math. The rest can't. And that's a number that should shock all of us. And then when you have that, you immediately get people saying, well, maybe the schools are bad, that there's no infrastructure, we need boards, we need computers, we need better paid teachers, the teachers need to, and all of those things seem plausible. And one of the things we had written about again in 2011 was the fact that, in fact, there was relatively little evidence that any of these things work. And since then, unfortunately, all of those statements have been proved true. I don't want you to think that I'm going to go away from this point thinking that I'm saying nothing works, but just hold your breath. So in 2011, we had had evidence. We were randomized control trials of blackboards, randomized control trials of other school infrastructure of different kinds. And indeed, infrastructure is not unimportant. If there's no school, you cannot have learning. You can't learn. There is sentimental and romantic beliefs about what you can do on your cell phone, but mostly we saw from the pandemic that once there is no school, children don't learn. They fall back. So you need a building. But I think the basic fact now from many more studies since in the last 10 years is that infrastructure doesn't matter so much, nor does really very little evidence for teacher pay. There's a wonderful randomized control trial in Indonesia, a very large one, where teacher salaries were doubled and nothing happened to test scores. So none of those things matter. And in other words, the children are not learning, and they're not learning because of the these expensive things that can you put in the school. So when you say that to people, they say, well, maybe it's really that they can't learn. Maybe it's just these children, they're malnutrited. They didn't get they didn't get to eat when they were in the mother's womb, and so they are really not able to learn. And there is a large and influential view saying that. I'm sure it's important to have, and I'm glad that the government of India has, under Nipun, taken on the idea that early childhood is important. It's important that children get the Anganwadi system is strengthened. They get learning and feeding at the same time. All of this is important. But I'll give you a study, something from a study we did. This was a study of vegetable and fruit sellers in markets in Kolkata and Delhi. These were all children under average age 11. They were all sellers. They were selling themselves. You go to them and say, give me 400 grams of carrots and 200 grams of peas. They calculate and tell you the amount back in seconds. You give them 200 rupees, they give you change back in another second. It's all done in faster than a calculator could do it. And this is true so they get the calculation right 93% of the time. And if you sort of say, no, that's not right, 99% of the time. They just get it right. They all can do it. The next thing we did was we asked them, okay, so you can do this. So then we talked to a parent and we asked them, okay, can you do the Asar math? Asar math is like 86 minus 37. I mean, they've been doing 200 minus something times something plus something times something. They say, no, if I could do that, I would be in school. They cannot. So there is an amazing. So in other words, that our children, these disadvantaged children who are working in markets, they are the children of the poorest, are fully able to do mental math as fast as me, maybe faster. And they're not able, but as soon as you show you something that comes from a school or looks like a school math or is written on a piece of paper, They say, no, I don't know that. And they really can't do it. Our entire pedagogy is designed to intimidate. We teach to make children feel bad about themselves because they're not, you haven't learned everything that was in the curriculum, which is dictated by some central set of experts who have decided that all these children need to learn these things, even if most of them, as I told you, cannot add or subtract like the ESSER results show. But still, in class 5, we'll teach you class 5 math. It doesn't matter if you can add or subtract. So by doing that, by treating you as a failure if you cannot do certain specified things, we break the confidence of the children. Our education system, so in other words, and encouragingly, the converse is true. When we actually decide to teach children respectfully, say, this is what you need, if you don't know this, that's no problem, we'll teach you that. They learn very, very fast. So both sides of that is true. If you actually respect the child and say that you can learn, and here's what you need to know, I'll teach you that, they learn extremely fast. That's also results from a bunch of interventions done all over the world, in India, a lot of them by Pratham, and it's always the same. Can I take a couple of more minutes? How many? 5 more? Okay. So in other words, I think again, it's easy to formulate an answer. It's easy to say, these kids, maybe they can't learn. And it's much more, I think that there's actually lots of good news in the world. Lots of good things happen if you do them. But you have to be mindful, you have to think about why they would work. And when they do work. It's not that these kids cannot be taught. They can be taught. We just don't try to teach them. Let me end with one more example. This is what I do for a living, so I bore my students with it, so I could go on for hours. But let me end with one more. One thing that I told you, I'll tell you something we got very wrong in our book. There was no discussion of mental health in our book. We and I think this was the accepted prejudice, at least in the economics community, but probably a little bit beyond, in the policy-making community. Poor people cannot afford to be depressed because they have a hard life, they have to work. The depression means you're lying in bed and not doing anything. We've started to measure depression. One of the best studies of depression is in Goa. Vikram Patel, who has done these studies. My friend Vikram is an amazing scholar, and he has done many of these studies in Goa. So one of the things that those studies find is that depression, both male and female, is pervasive. We've done a study which builds on what is done in Tamil Nadu, and we find that among the elderly, the depression rates are mind-boggling. 40% are depressed. Elderly women, 40% are depressed. There really that's catastrophic. They're really, and again, that clashes into one of our other myths. We live by myths, and that we have to, but some of those myths are dangerous. That the family will take care of it. And I tell you, we have been trying, there's a government pension program for these women, 1,000 rupees, nothing much. But we cannot get the bureaucracy to agree to give it to them. They keep saying, why are you giving this money, this waste? Remember I told you before, giving money to poor people is not a good thing. You shouldn't give it to them. And in particular, these women, their families will take care of it. Families don't. Now in Tamil Nadu has had demographic transition 15, 20 years ago, so they are less than 2 children, and many of them had 1 child, and the 1 child has gone off to the city, and his wife doesn't like her mother-in-law, and they're gone. No one comes to see her. She cannot use a cell phone. We have to teach these women to use cell phones because they have no one to call. So we try to pair them up with people they can at least call to make life a little bit less tedious for them. So again, because we I want to end this on this example, because the example is very nice in saying a set of our prejudices, that the family takes care of people, poor people cannot be depressed. In fact, we've known that this is a big problem. One of the other things that Vikram and my colleague Frank Shilbach and another friend from Harvard, Gautam Rao, have been doing is looking at the effects of cognitive and behavioral therapy on these depressed people. And you see therapy done, and one of the things they demonstrate is that therapy done by a very, sort of lightly trained sort of person with no university degree can already make big difference, and big difference that lasts 5 years. So it's really it's again easy to solve problems. Not all of them, but there are many easy to solve problems. We don't solve them because we tell ourselves stories that are wrong. I think what is critical, so I think I wanted to, we do randomized control trials, and randomized control trials are very, very kind of convincing ways to capture the evidence. But mostly we should be, even more fundamental than that, is to just ask questions, to say, what is it that, we have all these myths about all these things. Why do I believe this? Where did that come from? What convinced me of that? Is it just my introspection about human nature, or is it there's something that holds on to it? And I think if we did a little bit open our eyes, I think we would build a better world.